Hello, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Inside Scoop with Sue. I'm Sharon, another editor at Your Teen, subbing in for Sue today. And I have with me Ann Garcia, who's a certified financial planner. And today we're going to be talking about the Fafsa. It's time for the Fafsa. Ann, can you tell us a little bit about your work with college and college finances and how you came to be this expert in the Fafsa?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for having me here. I'm a financial advisor, and early in my career, I noticed advisors weren't talking much about college, and yet families were asking about it all the time. And at the same time, I was seeing an increasing number of young adults coming through with lots and lots of student loans. And I said, you know what? I feel like we should be talking about this. And so at the time, I'm a mom of twins who are now in college, but at the time they were just starting middle school. And I thought, you know what, I need to know about this for myself anyway. And so I started doing some research on it and started writing a blog called The College Financial Lady. And here we are all these years later. And I have a website all about college planning.
I think that's fantastic because I'm following in your footsteps. I have 3 children. My oldest is in 10th grade. So this is really coming at us. It seems like faster than ever, especially with COVID. There was some sort of time warp there where all of a sudden the kids got older.
Right.
So what I'd love to talk about today with the Fafsa is 2 things. I'd like to talk about what is it? Why do we need to do it? Sort of those basics for those of us who are new to it. And then a little bit about practicalities, timing, how we do it, what may have changed, if anything, from previous years. So maybe you can start us off by telling us, what is this scary sounding thing?
Right. And let me start by saying it's not as scary as it used to be.
Okay.
The Fafsa is pretty legendary among parents because it's confusing and complicated. And over the years, it's gotten a little bit less so. But the Fafsa is the free application for federal student aid. And it is a financial aid application that's used by colleges all over the country to allocate financial aid. It's also the application for federal aid programs like student loans, work study, Pell Grants, and those are really the key pieces of the federal student aid program. The Fafsa becomes available every year on October 1st. And so families are scrambling right now to figure out what they need to do tomorrow to fill it out.
Where do we get it? Do we have to go to a certain website tomorrow?
Yes, it's at the federal student aid website. It's just studentaid.gov is the website where it'll be. It won't be there today, but it will be there tomorrow, and the site will probably be crashing because millions and millions of people will be trying to fill out the Fafsa. So the Fafsa is important. I know a lot of people go, well, I'm not going to get any financial aid. Why do I need to fill it out? And I firmly believe everyone who's applying to college should fill out the Fafsa. And there are a few reasons for that. First and foremost, you could get aid, and if you don't fill out the Fafsa, you won't. But secondly, it's the only way to get a student loan. And most families say that college ended up costing them more than they thought it would. And so having access to a little bit of extra funds in the form of a student loan can be really, really valuable. It's also the only way your student would get work study. And if they're eligible, and lots of students could be eligible for work study, even if they don't think they are. There's also the issue that that if you don't file the Fafsa, you won't be even considered for financial aid. And then lots and lots of families think, well, I'm not eligible, I shouldn't, so I'm not going to apply. And then people will know that I'm not applying for financial aid. And in fact, there's pretty equal distribution among people at the very low end of the income spectrum and people at the very high end of the income spectrum who don't fill out the Fafsa. So the fact that you don't fill it out doesn't tell a college, hey, I'm willing to pay. And if that's you, that can be very helpful in the application process.
And isn't it also the case that some merit aid scholarships that don't account for financial need still require the Fafsa?
Sometimes they will, because oftentimes there is a need component to a merit scholarship. So it could be, it's X dollars, but funded up to the extent of your need.
I see.
And so if you haven't completed the FAFSA, no one knows. No one knows that.
Well, we have a question here from Christine, who wants to know, is timing important? Is doing it October 1st versus October 5th a big deal? And I would add to that, is it doing it everybody here is on the ball, we're watching today, but is doing it November 1st, December 1st? What does it matter, and how fast should we do it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And a lot of people tell you should do it right away on October 1st. There is a small pool of financial aid that's first come, first served, but my general recommendation is if for most people, the difference between October 1st, October 15th, October 30th isn't material. The vast majority of financial aid is allocated by the colleges. And so thinking of the fact that very few people have applied or been accepted to colleges on October 1st, you're not getting anywhere in the pool. You're not getting ahead of anyone in line. Typically, your financial aid package is crafted with your acceptance. There may be exceptions depending on where you live. Some states have state-based grant programs that do have limited funds. And if you're eligible for those, then you should apply for it on the 1st. For everyone else, I usually recommend that you look at your situation. The one thing that you can control on the FAFSA, if you're thinking about it for the first time this year, is how much money is in your assets. And so for most people, it is helpful to wait until you've paid your big bills for the month, your mortgage or your rent, your credit card bill. If there's a big purchase that you're intending to make anyway, you should do those before you fill out the FAFSA rather than racing to get it done on the 1st. And again, the site crashes so much on October 1st because so many people think they have to do it that day. And I would say there's a very small subset of people who really need to do it that day. In the old days, the FAFSA used to come out in January. And so when it came out in January, you had already done your college applications by the time it came out, and you were kind of racing to get in there and get into that pool. But like I said, there's a small amount of financial aid that is first come, first served, where the difference between October 1st and October 5th or even November 1st is gonna make a difference. Pell Grants are available to everyone who's eligible. Student loans are available to everyone who's eligible. And the majority of need-based financial aid that comes in the form of grants comes from the schools themselves. So you're almost always better served by filing your FAFSA on the date when you have the lowest possible expected family contribution than by filing it on October 1st.
That's really helpful. I just want to encourage everybody who's watching to pop your questions in the comments, and we'll try to get those answered by Ann. I have questions for you too.
All right, let's go.
So if we're new to this, what should we expect? How long does it take to fill it out? What kind of records do I need to have available? Is it like my taxes? How much data do I need, and where do I find it?
Yeah, and it's a funny set of data that you actually need. It takes probably about half an hour to do the FAFSA. You'll do it together with your student because there are questions that they answer and questions that you answer. The first thing that you need to do before you fill it out is create an Fsa Id. And that often takes a day or two to get done. So if you're going to be filing the FAFSA this fall and you haven't yet created your Fsa Id, go onto studentaid.gov as soon as you're done watching this and create your Fsa Id. As soon as you have that, then you can file the FAFSA. The things that you will need are your tax return, your W-2s. These are all from 2020 because the FAFSA uses what's called prior income, but it's actually, when you're filling it out, it's the prior year. So you'll be using your income from 2020, and then you'll be using your assets on the day that you file. So you'll need your tax return because there's some data that's in there, and you'll need your W-2s. Because what the FAFSA does when you fill it out is first you will link your FAFSA to your tax return via a tool called the IRS Data Retrieval tool. A lot of people go, oh, privacy, don't want to do that. venture a guess that the hassle of tracking down your tax information in any other form and submitting it to all the schools is a bigger hassle than identity theft. To be perfectly honest, having done that one time for one school. So do use the IRS data retrieval tool. It works for almost all filing statuses now. And that really simplifies that transfer. So that'll pick up things like your adjusted gross income, your tax liability, and lots and lots of pieces of the picture that are important. But then you have to go through and add back things like all of your untaxed income. So you need your W-2s because those will show how much you put into 401ks, HSAs, 403bs. All of that gets added back to your income. So you need your W-2 to find all of those items. And then, for people who make deductible IRA contributions, those you'll find on your tax return, and you add those back as well. Then,
go ahead. I can't believe it only takes 30 minutes to do this. Go ahead. Yes.
Then you'll be asked questions about your assets, and you put the net value of your assets. So first it asks about what you have in your checking and savings account, and then it asks what's in your assets. And that's what I was saying. You should spend down your savings on anything you're going to be buying anyway. So don't go and buy an annuity because, that's going to be better on the FAFSA than your 529. But, if you're going to buy a computer, if you have some yard work that needs to get done, whatever that is, pay for those things first. You write those in as your balance in your checking and savings account, and then the net value of your investments. Now, one of the things that confuses people when it asks about investments, especially for people with multiple children, if you have a 529 for each child, you report all of them on your FAFSA. Then your student answers some additional questions, kind of the same set of questions about income and assets. Fortunately for students, it's usually less of a big deal because their first $7,000 of income doesn't count. And then their assets. So that's another thing that's important for this, especially this past summer when a lot of kids had good summer jobs where they made a lot of money. Their assets count for a lot in the FAFSA formula. So, a student who worked 30 hours a week all summer might have $4,000 or more in their bank account. And 20% of the student's assets are considered available to pay for college. So, $1,000 that a student has is going to be $200 more of expected family contribution on the FAFSA. So if your student made money that they're planning to use for college, a great thing to do for it is move it into your 529, because then it's treated as your asset as the parent, and only 5.6% of its value counts. So you can definitely do a little strategizing like that. And students with earned income can also do Roth Ira contributions. Those don't count in the FAFSA. And whatnot. But those are, that's the student's bank account is the often overlooked piece of the FAFSA. And right now, with minimum wage being high and and FAFSA being done in the fall, right after they've made all their summer job money, it can be worth paying some attention to.
Great. That's good to know. We have some questions coming in here, so I'm hoping we can answer a few of them.
Yeah.
Or all of them. Diane's asking, do you use the same ID you used for an older child, or do you need a separate one for each student?
Great question, Diane. So your student has an FSA ID and you have an FSA ID. Yours is the same. There's, each of them will have their own. And each of you will use your same FSA ID for all 4 years that you file the FAFSA. So students got theirs, parents got theirs, both of them get used. Here's another thing that I learned as a twin parent who fills out 2 FAFSAs every year. Right. You as the parent can transfer your information directly to the other student's FAFSA, but only if you fill them out at the same time.
Okay. That sounds like a real time saver if you can do that.
Absolutely.
And you do need to fill that out for every year of college, correct?
So, go ahead.
When you go in the second year, does it pre-populate with some of the information from the prior year because you have your FSA ID for your parents?
Yes.
Okay.
So if when you log in, you'll be either a first-time user or a renewal user. And so as a renewal user, you're just going through, and it's basically going to show you, hey, last year you were married filing joint or head of households. That's still you, and take you through that same set of questions. And then you're only sending it to one school.
Okay. We had a little bit of an audio problem there for a second. Can you just repeat the last thing that you said?
Yeah. So when you do the renewal FAFSA, it will basically just ask you to update the information that's different this time.
Okay. I think we're through our audio blip there. Okay. We have a question from Veronice, whose student did not make a lot of money, doesn't have the problem slash good thing that you were talking about, and we don't file taxes. How do we do the income that was earned?
So what you'll do is when you file the FAFSA, it asks you, have you filed a tax return? And if your answer is no, it says, are you going to or are you not going to? So you'll check that I'm not going to. And then you'll just be asked to document any income that you had in other ways, whether it's through W-2s or 1099s or anything like that. But if your income is very, very low, absolutely make sure that you file the FAFSA. Do it sooner rather than later, because you are one of those people who's eligible for some of that pool of money that comes on a first come, first served basis.
Great. Yes. And Kim is asking about a kid who's, I'm not going to leave this one up here because it's tall, but a student who's applying for a law school. Mm-hmm. They're still living at home and we are still paying for their expenses, but it's my understanding that on the actual applications, they apply as independent. So when applying for using the FAFSA, how do they go that route?
Yeah, that's a good question. And my suggestion is that you check with the schools that they're applying to, whether they're independent or dependent, because a lot of graduate schools have different requirements for that. So for example, some require that the student was filing taxes as independent for 3 years in order to claim, in order for them to be independent. So just ask the schools that you're applying to, and whatever the majority of them say, do it that way.
Great. Thank you. Now, so you're sitting down with your student. Do you have questions from parents about the fact that your child will now see all that financial information that maybe they didn't know before? And do parents have concerns about that? Is this a time to have a big conversation, or what would you say about that?
So I'm glad you asked that, because that's one of the things that does come up when you do the FAFSA. You know, after you've filled it out, the FAFSA generates what's called a student aid report, and that gets sent to the student, and it's got every line item of the FAFSA in it. So yeah, your student will see that. You know, the good news for a lot of parents is students don't pay a lot of attention to their emails. So perhaps you have an opportunity to intercept that and say, oh, that one's actually for me. Let me review it for you. But yeah, your student is going to see a lot of financial data. I would say as a parent, our kids have figured a lot of that out already.
Mm-hmm. So it's coming up.
It's coming up, but you know, you raise a really good point, which is, I feel like a lot of times families go, oh, the FAFSA, this is it. You know, this is where I get financial aid. And the thing with the FAFSA is schools are required to collect the FAFSA in order to give you financial aid, but they're not required to give you financial aid just because your FAFSA says you can't pay the full cost of college. So a really important conversation to be having with your kid before you get far into the application process is what your college budget is. Mm-hmm. And you know, the fact that you might be able to afford $80,000 a year doesn't mean that you should or want to spend $80,000 a year. You know, there are lots and lots of good paths through college at lots and lots of different price points. You know, there's merit scholarships, there's starting at community college and transferring to four-year college, there's getting AP and IB credits before you graduate high school so you can finish college in less than 4 years. So there are lots of paths to do that, but it's really important for parents and kids to be clear before they go into the application process what their college budget is. I talk to far too many families who are, you know, trying to fit a $60,000 a year college into a $10,000 a year college budget. And that, of course, is never going to happen other than for that family to take on loans that they'll never pay off. So the other thing that's really important besides just doing the FAFSA is before you apply to a college, do that college's net price calculator. So every college is required to have a net price calculator on its website. You punch in all of your data and it will tell you what sort of grant aid you're likely to get. Now, those colleges may offer additional scholarships beyond that that have an application process. So even if the expected family contribution doesn't necessarily fit your budget, there may be a path to get them into your budget. But don't apply to schools that you can't afford, because just because the FAFSA says that your expected family contribution is $28,000 a year, there's no guarantee that college is going to cost you $28,000 a year.
Right. And it's tricky because you're doing the FAFSA now or very soon.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have the application process, and then financial awards come out when? April?
When you get your acceptance, it'll come.
Yeah.
That's part of the reason why. So in the old days, the FAFSA became available in January, and then you'd get accepted, and then you'd still be waiting for your financial aid award.
Right.
So now at least you get them both at the same time. Right. And your awards are going to be all over the map. I mean, when my daughter applied to a lot of private schools, and the range of net prices that we saw was from $13,000 to $81,000. Using the same set of data. Mm-hmm. So every school treats student need differently. So don't think that the FAFSA is it as far as getting scholarships. You still need to be informed about what colleges are gonna do with that data, and talk with your student before you start the application process. Right. I always encourage families to talk about it from a goals perspective as opposed to a limitations perspective. So rather than you can only apply to public schools, how about we've saved enough for you to get through a public college debt-free? And there may be other schools you can find that fit within that budget, or there may be scholarships that'll help those schools fit within that budget. But that's really our target for you, because that shows your student that you've been thinking about this, you've been planning for this, you've been preparing for this. It's a monumental expense, and they're part of the team to get them through.
It gives them some agency in the process when they know what their budget is.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's super helpful. And Angela has a comment here that says that the high school had a planning financially for post-high school education as part of a required finance and econ class. So the students had to ask about family income in advance. That seems really sophisticated. And Angela thought it was great preparation.
Yeah, absolutely.
I know that we have taken a lot of your time. I was hoping that you could, I don't know if this is a brief answer or not, but if you could briefly comment on what happens if the two parents of the prospective college student are not married to each other and they're not in the same household. Who fills out the FAFSA?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And it ties into another piece, which is the Fafsa Simplification that's going to go into effect next year and the year after. So right now, the FAFSA only requires the custodial parent to fill it out. And current definition of the custodial parent is the parent that the student spends the most time with. Now, they don't ask for any kind of a sleep log or anything like that. So oftentimes, there are parents who have joint custody, and and in that case, it's usually beneficial for the lower earning parent to file the FAFSA, with the caveat that if they're receiving a lot of alimony and child support, that's going to offset it, because the parent who pays that subtracts it, the parent who gets it adds it. But you do need to be able to make a reasonable case that the student was living with you. So, if one's in New York and the other's in Atlanta, it's pretty obvious based on where the kid went to school, who the custodial parent was. So that's the only parent who files it. There is a second financial aid form that's used by a lot of private schools called the Css Profile. And most of the time, the Css Profile will ask both parents to complete it. So just know if you are, if your parents are divorced and you're applying to private schools, you might have to have both of them report their information. The Css Profile is done by the College Board, and it has a list on its site of all the schools that take it and whether they require both parents to file it. Now, as part of last year's year-end budget reconciliation bill, there was this, 172 pages of 5,000 pages worth Fafsa simplification. How are you simplifying that space is a different story. But a few changes are coming. Originally, all the changes were supposed to be in place as of next fall's FAFSA, but the Department of Education said they can't do it in that time frame. So they're phasing it in, and eventually it'll be within 2 years, it'll be that way. And that changes who files among divorced parents. And it will now, going forward, it will be the parent who provides the most financial support. So my recommendation to families who are applying now and where that's going to switch in the future is, once you get your financial aid letters, reach out to the financial aid office and ask that they will confirm that they will continue considering your student for financial aid on the basis that you applied today. Because what you don't want to do is get into college and 2 years later have your cost go up to a point that you can't afford it.
Right there. Yeah. Cause that could switch the evaluation. One more question from Suhi. If you're a widow and you only have one source of income, are there any other things that can help? Would that be a question for the colleges that you're applying to? And certainly would be considered, right?
Absolutely. They will ask your, they'll ask your marital status and whatever, depending on what your source of income is. If it's a Social Security survivor benefit, only the taxable portion of that counts. You don't count the untaxed portion. So the formula can be very advantageous in some circumstances like that. But the important thing is one piece of it is what the FAFSA does. You may be eligible for a Pell Grant or for work study or things like that, but there's a limited pool of financial aid that comes from the federal government. The majority of it comes from the schools. So you do want to be doing those net price calculators, finding schools that meet 100% of your need, and really using that rather than the FAFSA as the basis for deciding where to apply.
But it does sound like getting the ball rolling sooner rather than later is probably advantageous.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna have to let you go, Ann. We could keep you here all day, it feels like, but we are so grateful for all this really valuable advice. And if anybody wants to find you, what is the best way to find you and your information on the internet? How should people reach you?
Yeah, the best way to find me, especially if you have questions about the FAFSA, is my website, thecollegefinanciallady.com. It's just all one word. I know it's long and awkward, but that's how websites are.
Easy to remember, though.
Yes, the College Financial Lady.
Okay, well, thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. And, keep coming back. Your team has these wonderful interviews all the time, and I'm always glad when I get to participate in them, too. All right, thanks again, Ann. And
thank you for having me.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.